In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Cardinal Crimes. I have had a longer break than anticipated. I'm so sorry for that. My intention was to do episodes every other week, but that got away from me. I have been so busy. I'm starting a new master's degree. It's been a lot. And so my intention for the next episode that I put out was to do the final episode of our Mike de Bardeleben series, but I am still waiting to hear back on my FOIA request to the U.S. Secret Service, and they did email me, and they said that they found some documents that they think relate to my request, and they are currently reviewing them to see what is releasable, and so whenever they get that back to me, I will finish out that series. But today, we are going to cover a case that I have had on my list of cases for a while now. And up until just a few weeks ago, everyone thought this case was cold. But there have been huge updates, and an arrest has been made. So today, we are going to cover the murder of Ashley Okland, go over the timeline, the initial investigation, what was released to the public and what wasn't. We're going to talk about the recent arrest in the case and who has been charged with her murder. So let's get started. Friday, April 8th, 2011 was turning out to be a normal day for most in the Stone Creek townhome complex in West Des Moines, Iowa. There was a couple, Matthew and Liz, and they were on the property to purchase a townhome. They, like many, considered this to be a safe area, just a great place to live. Another resident of the complex named Carrie was in her home that afternoon. She said in an interview with the Des Moines Register on April 9th, 2011, that the only disruptions in the quiet complex were usually just the sounds of new homes being built and moving trucks bringing in new residents. But shortly after 2 p.m. on April 8th, the quiet of the complex was shattered. Carrie didn't hear anything unusual, and neither did Matthew and Liz, who were doing their final walkthrough, until 2 ambulances rushed onto the property. But one resident of the Stone Creek complex did hear something out of the ordinary. Right around 2 p.m. that day, a woman and her mother heard a commotion in the townhome next to them. They shared a wall with it. Now, it wasn't a townhome that anyone lived in. It was a model townhome and one that realtors would show. But the woman and her mother heard what they described as 2 thuds. Now, early news reports say that an employee who worked for Rotland Homes, which was the company that owned the Stone Creek property, heard the commotion and went inside the model home to check it out. But court filings from this year say that, quote, a witness and her mother were present in the townhome that shared a wall with the model home. My assumption, and I always want to make clear when I am making assumptions, is that this was a neighbor. So the neighbor is worried after hearing a commotion and goes into the townhome. And when she gets in, she finds a woman unresponsive on the ground. At 2:09 p.m., she calls 911 and first responders rush to the scene. Now, the thing I have found about this case is that it was extensively reported on when it happened in 2011, but at the same time, there was just very little information released by investigators. And initially, even the victim's name wasn't released, which is pretty standard practice. But what authorities did confirm was that she had been transported to the hospital, where she later died from 2 gunshot wounds. When her identity was finally made public, we learned who she was: 27-year-old Ashley Okland. Ashley was a real estate agent in Des Moines working for Iowa Realty. On the day of the shooting, she was hosting an open house at the model townhome, helping market the Stone Creek Court property. She was building a name for herself in real estate, and by all accounts, she genuinely loved what she did. Ashley had graduated from Iowa State University and was living with her boyfriend Eric and their dog Indy. She was social, outgoing, and someone who thrived being around others. One detail that stood out to me in particular was she had participated in RAGBRAI. And if you're not from Iowa, RAGBRAI is this week-long event in Iowa where thousands of people ride bikes across the state. They camp, stop in small towns. It's this whole party, this whole celebration. It's really social. It's a really high energy event. And to me, it really says something about the kind of person Ashley was. Friendly, active, and really involved in her community. According to her obituary, she was involved in multiple charities and organizations. She loved planning events, traveling, going to concerts, exercising. She was just always on the go. More than 1,600 people attended her funeral to honor her life. And it's that full, vibrant life that makes what happened to her so much more difficult to understand. So let's walk through the timeline of that day. Ashley had an open house scheduled from 1 to 6 p.m. at the model home. So by the time of the shooting, it had already begun. One detail that remains unclear to me is whether any potential buyers had stopped in yet, or if the afternoon had started off slow. Either way, investigators know that Ashley was alive and well right before 2 p.m. They know this because they were able to see that she had sent an email from her computer to a friend right before 2. Now, I don't have the exact time, and my guess is that she had a laptop with her in the home. Now, the email wasn't related to the open house. According to a KCCI article, it was an email talking about social plans they had for later. Now, based on this, my assumption is that there wasn't anyone in the townhouse with her right at that moment. If you're a realtor and holding an open house, I'm guessing you probably aren't going to be sitting on your computer while potential buyers are walking through. So I assume that it was slow at that moment and she took some time to check her email and send one to her friend. Then, shortly after 2 p.m., the neighbors hear a commotion, and they describe it as 2 thuds, spaced about 3 to 4 seconds apart. Now, investigators believe that those 2 thuds were actually the gunshots. The neighbor goes into the model townhome, finds Ashley unresponsive, and calls 911 at 2:09 p.m. I haven't been able to find an exact timing of Ashley's death, but initial reporting says she died later that day from her wounds in the hospital. Now, there isn't a lot released about the scene, but we do eventually learn that police recovered 2 fired .380 caliber cartridge cases at the scene. They saw that all the doors and windows in the living area of the townhome were locked or latched, and I'm assuming not the front door. They said there was no furniture or other items in the model home that, quote, corresponded to the thuds described by the witness, meaning no overturned furniture, broken glass, or any other damage. There were no signs of a struggle. An autopsy was conducted on April 10th, and Ashley's cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds. The manner of death was homicide. The autopsy revealed that she had been shot at close range, once in the chest and once in the face. Ashley's murder was incredibly shocking to her family, the community, and the realtor community overall. Now, police and investigators tried to assure the community that there was no reason to believe that this was anything other than an isolated incident, that there was no danger to the community, and that they didn't believe anyone was out there randomly targeting realtors. Despite that, there was a widespread pausing of all open houses that weekend, and not just from Iowa Realty, where Ashley worked, but other agencies like Coldwell Banker and Remax, they also paused showings. People were afraid. And this incident really brought up to the forefront the dangers that realtors often face. And we've had plenty of episodes, even on this podcast, about realtors who have been targeted and murdered during showings. An article in the Des Moines Register by Adam Bells and Perry Beeman says, quote, "The West Des Moines shooting marked the second attack on a real estate agent in Iowa this year, being 2011. In February, an agent who had been asked to show a home was assaulted in Ottawa. The female got free and the men fled with cash and a cell phone. She was later treated and released at a hospital, and 2 people were arrested." In Ashley's case, there were very few details initially released, but I think this statement from police says a lot, that they didn't think this was random. They believed whoever shot and killed Ashley knew her, and that she was specifically targeted. But who would do that? The thought that Ashley had any sort of enemy, or that anyone would want to harm her, was just unfathomable to her friends and family. Ashley's father, Tim, was quoted in an article in the Des Moines Sunday Register published on April 10th, saying that the family didn't believe she had any enemies. He said, quote, "We just don't know what happened. It's hard for us to imagine." Ashley was a kind and friendly person. She loved her job as a real estate agent, and her family said she loved being around people. Ashley's brother said in an interview with KCCI in 2025 that he spent the entire afternoon with his sister on April 7th, the day before she was murdered. She had hired him to help as an assistant with a few things like making pamphlets, so the two had spent the afternoon at a Panera working together. And he said when he spent the afternoon with her, there was no indication that anything was wrong. She didn't seem off or like she was afraid, and she didn't mention anything. He said, quote, "We were very close. If there was something going on, she would have told me." Now, most of the articles that came out right after Ashley's murder consistently said there were no leads and no suspects. But investigators were doing everything that they could. They were interviewing anyone connected to Ashley, and they weren't ruling out anyone as a suspect. And they were asking the public and the realtor community to come forward if they had any information at all. In fact, on Monday, April 11th, just a few days after her murder, real estate agents in the Des Moines area were notified that police were looking for a man who was seen talking to Ashley. Police clarified that they aren't calling this man a suspect, but that they just wanted to talk to him. They described him as a, quote, scruffy-looking young man who drove a black SUV with, quote, tricked-out wheels. They said Ashley had been seen talking with him on 2 or 3 occasions in February and in early March, and that they were seen talking outside of the model townhome where she was shot, just not on the same day that it happened. Investigators said they believed the man was a realtor, but they wanted to verify that that was the case. They also reiterated that he wasn't a suspect, and that the vehicle wasn't seen on the property the day of her murder. There are other reports in the weeks and months following her murder noting that investigators were still trying to locate this guy. Now, on Monday, April 16th, it was reported that a search warrant was issued in Ashley's murder, and that they had searched a location the previous Friday. But there were absolutely no details released, not what they were looking for, not if they found anything, and nothing even on the location of the search. A county judge sealed the document, and Lieutenant Jim Barrett was quoted in a Des Moines Register article by Mary Stegmeyer saying, "When investigating a case, there are various reasons why a search warrant is requested to look for information or property. Whether at the crime scene or any other location, it's important that people are afforded due process, and that any information or property seized that may become evidence is legally obtained." And I understand keeping things out of the public eye, but I wonder if the amount of information they kept from the public in this case was a mistake. I wonder if they had released more details. Maybe there would have been more tips coming in, and maybe we would have seen movement sooner. But Ashley's case eventually goes cold. Reward money amounts increased from $1,000 to well over $100,000. Multiple agencies reviewed the case. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted. Thousands of tips and leads were followed up on, but there were no named suspects. Over the years, there were a few leads followed up on that seemed promising, or at least caught the public's attention. In June of 2011, just a few months after Ashley's murder, a real estate agent named Joe, whom police had talked to previously, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He died on June 8th, exactly 2 months after Ashley's murder. His body was found in his black SUV. Now, this made me wonder if this was the same guy they were looking for before, the one who was seen talking to Ashley multiple times. But a Register article by Mary Stegmeyer clarifies that the man's vehicle didn't match the description of the SUV that witnesses told police they saw by the townhomes. Joe's family told the Register that he had been talked to by police and cleared, that he wasn't involved at all. His family said he was upset over Ashley's death, and he was also having financial problems. In that same article, it says, though, that this, quote, is not the first person involved in the investigation to attempt suicide. It says a woman named Wanda, quote, the woman who discovered Okland after the shooting and called 911 was reported missing on April 25th and tried to kill herself, according to police reports. The 54-year-old woman was found less than 24 hours later. Now, this is the only time I could find in reporting where the person who found her was named. And I mentioned that there were discrepancies in the reporting. Some reports saying that the person who found her was an employee, some saying it was a neighbor. I tried to look up Wanda and her last name to see if she was an employee of Rutland Homes, but couldn't find anything. So I'm guessing it was the neighbor. Now, investigators obviously looked into both of these to determine if they were linked to Ashley's murder, but I believe it was determined that neither was involved. I can imagine, though, that they were greatly impacted by the tragedy of losing Ashley and by being the one to find her. Later on in 2014, investigators began looking into a man accused of murder in Arkansas. 33 years old at the time, Michael Lewis was accused of setting up an appointment with an Arkansas realtor. He wanted to view a vacant home in a rural area. The realtor was then murdered and left in a shallow grave. Though after some time, they no longer considered this man to be a suspect in Ashley's murder. Her friends and family were forced to try to move forward without answers, without knowing who did this and why. A friend and coworker was quoted in an article by Mary Stegmeyer saying, "For a long time, I felt like I was going to wake up someday, or the phone was going to ring and it would be her, and it was all going to be some big mistake. And honestly, there's still a part of me where it doesn't seem quite real, even a month later. We are all kind of stuck on that day." Immediately following Ashley's murder, a lot of her family declined to speak with the media about her death. After some time, though, the family and Ashley's boyfriend Eric began urging the public to come forward with information if they had it. Eric was quoted as saying, "I can't think of anything that I could say that would convey the feelings that we're feeling, so I've decided to just keep quiet. We're trying to tread the fine line of dealing with this as privately as we can, but at the same time, keeping this in the public eye. How to do that is a struggle." And now, just to note, I am positive they looked into Eric, her boyfriend, and they ruled him out. Now, for 15 years, there seemed to be no movement in this case, no new details, nothing. At least, nothing that had been released to the public. But, despite articles claiming there were no suspects and no new leads, I think investigators had their eyes on someone from the very beginning. On March 18th, 2026, there was a massive update in this case, the case that many thought would never be solved. In a press conference, law enforcement said they had arrested 53-year-old Kristin Ramsey after a grand jury indicted her on first-degree murder charges. Now, everyone was shocked. I truly don't think anyone in the public saw this coming. And let me just say that there is still very little that has been released, and because she was indicted via grand jury, I'm pretty sure that the information in the arrest warrant are not publicly available. But let's talk about what we have learned, because a lot of these details that we're learning now are details that police had at the time of Ashley's murder, but just weren't released to the public. And I hope that we all eventually learn why this arrest took so long and what specific evidence they have. Okay, so Kristin Ramsey, 53 years old now, but would have been 38 at the time of Ashley's murder. According to her LinkedIn profile and court records, in 2011, she worked as a sales manager for Rutland Homes, the company that owned the Stone Creek townhome property. Now, my first thought when I learned that she was an employee was that I remembered those early conflicting reports that an employee had heard the commotion and found her. If you remember when we first talked about the timeline, it was reported that an employee heard a commotion and found her, but now court records are saying it was a neighbor and her mother. This is a detail I definitely want clarified. It's possible it's both, but my thought was, even before I learned of Kristin Ramsey, was that maybe this employee had something to do with it. I mean, it's happened before, right? Where the person who commits the murder is the one who calls police and says that they found the person. So this KCCI timeline that I've been referencing, it has way more information than what was available when Ashley was first murdered. So let's go through some of those details I didn't mention before. And a lot of these details in the KCCI timeline are coming from recent court filings, and all of my sources are in the description of this episode. Now, the timeline says that the neighbor and her mother who heard the two thuds shortly after 2 p.m. then saw Kristin Ramsey outside of the front door of the townhome. They said they then saw her from the window of their townhome in the parking lot, pacing near her vehicle and talking on the cell phone. The article says that the call that she was making was made to another Rutland Homes employee within 2 minutes of the thuds that the neighbor heard. The witnesses, I'm guessing right, that neighbor, then saw Ramsey back her vehicle up at, quote, a high rate of speed in an erratic manner. But then she drove away and shortly after returned to the area. The neighbor then was worried that something was wrong, so that's when they entered the townhome, found Ashley unresponsive, and called police. Now, beyond just witnesses saying they saw her there, law enforcement also executed a search warrant at Kristin Ramsey's home on May 3rd, 2011. According to KCCI, they recovered multiple firearms, illegal substances, and posters, quote, threatening violence. And in the years that followed Ashley's murder, Ramsey was interviewed multiple times by law enforcement, and she reportedly gave conflicting accounts of what she was doing that day. So, getting to this year, 2026. On March 17th, 2026, law enforcement executed a second search warrant at her home. They did one in 2011 and now one this year. And they again recovered multiple firearms, illegal substances, and similar threatening posters, whatever that means. And they arrested her without incident that same day. And the assistant police chief, Jody Hayes, says that they don't anticipate any other arrests in this case. So there are no doubt rumors swirling, and that's not something I plan to dive into here. At the press conference where they announced the arrest, Ashley's two siblings asked that the public respect both their privacy and the suspect's family's privacy. We all want to know more about her, what her connection is, if any, to Ashley Okland, all of that. What I'm hoping is eventually revealed, especially if this goes to a jury trial, is what specific evidence they have against her beyond just witnesses placing her at the scene. I want to see how the state attempts to meet their burden of proof. The little information we now know shows that they at least had Kristin Ramsey on their radar from the very beginning. We also know that there were other search warrants executed. An article in the Des Moines Register published on May 11th, 2011 says 4 search warrants had been executed in the case. Aside from knowing that they searched Ramsey's home on May 3rd, we don't know the location of the other ones. I want to understand what new evidence they were able to get in 2026 that gave them what they needed to arrest her. If she was on their radar from the beginning, what was preventing them from arresting her then? Kristin Ramsey is being represented by Alfredo Parrish, who is a well-known defense attorney in Iowa. I reached out to Mr. Parrish for comment on the case, and while I know that neither he nor the prosecution will offer many details, if any, to the media, I asked if he'd be willing to provide insight into 2 things. How he views the strength and nature of the evidence after such a long gap between the crime and the arrest, and what he wants the public to understand about the case that might not be reflected in current media coverage. He did respond and said he would discuss my request with his co-counsel and get back to me, and he added, quote, "There are many unique factors a defense lawyer must consider, given the time between the death and the charges." If he gets back to me with any details, I'll add in a bonus episode with what he responds with. Now, since Kristin Ramsey's arrest, there have been a number of appearances and motions filed. Ramsey has entered a plea of not guilty, which is standard practice to begin with. The defense successfully reduced her bond from $2 million to $500,000. She was able to post the 10% required in cash and is now out on bond, but required to remain on house arrest with a GPS monitor, routine drug tests. She's only allowed to leave her home for medical appointments or meetings with her attorney. During the bond hearing, while the prosecution was cross-examining defense witnesses, prosecutors brought up or alluded to the illegal substances that had been found in her home. However, during this bond hearing, the state, quote, presented no evidence on the type or location of where any alleged drugs were found in the defendant's home. Now, of note, in court filings by the prosecution, they argued that she shouldn't be allowed to be released on bond because of the weapons found in her home. And, they believed that she might be a danger to herself or a flight risk. But a part of the conditions for her release were that any firearms in her home would have to be removed. In deciding whether her bond should be reduced, the judge noted that Ramsey has been a person of interest from very early on in the investigation, and even had her home searched in 2011, but that she hasn't fled in those years. That, paired with the many letters of support from family and the community, and her lack of a criminal history, he said he didn't believe her to be a flight risk or a risk to the community. Now, there have already been other defense motions to quash certain search warrants and other motions arguing that evidence in the case has been lost or destroyed. We're going to see a lot of movement like this in the coming months. As of right now, there is a trial status conference scheduled for June 19th, 2026, and a tentative jury trial date set for January 11th, 2027. I'm guessing that these dates might move around and change a little. I am very interested to see how this all plays out. And I'm hoping to see what evidence the state has. I want to know why this arrest took so long and how they plan to meet their burden of proof. I'm hoping for a fair trial for Kristin Ramsey so there can be real justice for Ashley Okland. That is all I have for today's episode. Once again, I will keep you all updated on this case, and if I hear back from Alfredo Parrish, I will put whatever he has to say in a bonus episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.